Brielle's hands trembled as she stared at the foreclosure notice nailed to the town hall door. The black ink seemed to mock her, spelling out 30 days until Millbrook would belong to cattle baron Thaddeus Morrison. Around her, families gathered their children closer, whispering prayers and counting the coins in their pockets that would never be enough. She pressed her palm against the rough wood, feeling the splinters bite into her skin like the harsh reality biting into her heart. This was her fault. Her dead husband's debts had doomed them all. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The autumn wind cut through Main Street like a knife, carrying dust and the scent of dying dreams. Brielle pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, the black fabric marking her as the widow who had brought this curse upon their town. 6 months since Thomas died in that mysterious accident. 6 months since the deaths started pouring in like water through a broken dam. The other women avoided her eyes now, their whispers following her like shadows. "It's happening again," old Martha Hendricks muttered from her porch, rocking back and forth in her creaky chair. "The curse is back, just like it took her grandmother's husband, just like it took her mother's first love." Brielle's stomach twisted. The stories were just gossip, surely. Superstitious talk from frightened people looking for someone to blame. But deep in her bones, she felt the cold truth settling like winter frost. Every man who had tried to help her family in the past 3 generations had met with tragedy. Her grandmother's husband fell from his horse the day after their wedding. Her mother's first suitor drowned in the river after proposing. And now Thomas, dead from a fall that made no sense for a man who could ride any horse ever born. She walked past the general store where Mrs. Patterson quickly pulled her children inside, as if bad luck might spread like sickness. Past the blacksmith shop where Emma worked, her sister's hammer ringing against hot metal in steady, determined beats. Emma was only 19, still believing that hard work and hope could fix anything. She didn't understand, yet, that some problems were bigger than determination. The Morrison Ranch stretched beyond the hills like a kingdom, its cattle dotting the landscape like moving shadows. Thaddeus Morrison owned half the territory now, buying up failing farms and broken dreams. His money could save Millbrook, but men like him didn't give charity. They took what they wanted and left nothing but dust behind. Brielle's boots crunched on the dry ground as she made her way to the cemetery on the hill. Thomas's grave was still fresh, the wooden cross she had carved herself standing crooked in the wind. She knelt beside it, ignoring the dirt staining her already worn dress. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the silent earth. "Everyone's counting on me to find a way, but how can I save a whole town when I couldn't even save you?" A shadow fell across the grave. Brielle looked up to see a stranger on horseback, his silhouette dark against the orange sunset. He was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his horse like he was born in the saddle. Even from a distance, she could feel his eyes on her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The stranger tipped his hat and rode toward town, leaving Brielle alone with her dead husband and a growing certainty that everything was about to change. She just didn't know if it would save them or destroy them all. The stranger's horse kicked up clouds of dust as he rode down Main Street the next morning. Brielle watched from behind her kitchen curtain as half the town gathered to stare. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 30, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and eyes the color of summer sky. His clothes marked him as wealthy, his leather boots polished, and his coat cut from fine wool that cost more than most families earned in a year. He dismounted outside the saloon with easy grace, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden steps. When he smiled at Mrs. Patterson, the older woman actually blushed and smoothed her gray hair. Even from across the street, Brielle could see the charm rolling off him like heat from a forge. "That's trouble walking on 2 legs," Emma said, appearing beside her with flour dusting her dark hair. She had been baking since dawn, trying to use up their dwindling supplies before they spoiled. Men that pretty always leave broken hearts in their wake. Brielle let the curtain fall back into place. Pretty men are the least of our problems right now. But her eyes drifted back to the window. The stranger was talking to Sheriff Coleman now, gesturing toward the hills where the Morrison Ranch sprawled like a sleeping giant. There was something familiar about the way he held his shoulders, the confident tilt of his head. She had seen that posture before, but couldn't place where. Emma pressed a warm biscuit into her hand. Eat something. You're getting too thin. The biscuit tasted like sawdust in Brielle's mouth. Everything tasted like sawdust lately. Did you finish the order for the Henderson wedding? 3 dozen rolls, 2 pies, and a cake that looks better than the bride deserves. Emma's voice held forced cheerfulness. Mrs. Henderson paid half up front. It'll keep us in flour for another week. A week. Brielle closed her eyes against the familiar panic rising in her chest. They had 29 days left before Morrison's men came to collect. 29 days to find a miracle or watch their neighbors pack their lives into wagons and disappear into the endless prairie. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Visitors were rare these days. Most people crossed the street rather than risk the widow's curse touching their families. Brielle opened the door to find the stranger standing on her porch, hat in his hands. Up close, his beauty was almost painful to look at. His face belonged in paintings, all sharp angles and perfect proportions. But his eyes were kind, crinkled at the corners like he smiled often. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that wasn't quite Southern, wasn't quite Western. "I'm Jake Morrison. I was hoping we could talk." The name hit her like a physical blow. Morrison, son of the man who held their town's future in his greedy hands. She gripped the doorframe to keep from stumbling backward. "I know what you're thinking," Jake continued quickly, seeing her face change. "But I'm not here as my father's representative. I'm here because I want to help." Emma appeared behind Brielle, her presence solid and reassuring. "Help with what exactly?" Jake's gaze moved between them, taking in Emma's defiant stance and Brielle's pale shock. "I know about the debt, about the foreclosure. I have money of my own, separate from my father's business. Enough to pay what's owed and more. And what would you want in return?" Brielle found her voice at last, though it came out rougher than she intended. Something flickered in Jake's blue eyes. "Nothing you wouldn't want to give freely." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Brielle felt Emma tense beside her, felt the weight of the whole town's hopes settling on her shoulders like stones. "I don't understand," she said. Jake stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage, and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken despite everything. "I think you do. I've been watching you, Brielle Ashworth. The way you carry yourself. The way you put everyone else's needs before your own. A woman like you deserves better than a life spent grieving." Heat flooded her cheeks. No man had looked at her the way Jake Morrison was looking at her now. Not even Thomas, who had married her more for convenience than passion. But this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with money or power. "You should go," she whispered. Jake placed his hat back on his head, but his eyes never left her face. "I'm staying at the hotel. When you're ready to talk about saving your town, you know where to find me." He walked away without looking back, leaving Brielle standing in her doorway with her heart hammering against her ribs and Emma's worried gaze burning into her back. That evening, the town held an emergency meeting in the church. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of worried families, their faces lit by flickering candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Brielle sat in the back with Emma, feeling every eye in the room boring into her like accusations. Pastor Williams stood at the front, his weathered hands gripping the pulpit. "We all know why we're here. 28 days left before Morrison comes to collect. We need to discuss our options." "What options?" Samuel Hendricks called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "We don't have the money. Never did, never will." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Children shifted restlessly in their mothers' laps, too young to understand but old enough to sense the fear thick as smoke in the small building. There might be a way. Sheriff Coleman stood slowly, his badge catching the candlelight. "That Morrison boy, Jake, he came to see me today. Says he's got money to pay the debt." The church erupted in whispers. Hope and suspicion warred on every face. "And what's he want for it?" demanded Mrs. Patterson. Men like that don't give something for nothing. All eyes turned to Brielle. She felt her cheeks burn under their stares, knowing exactly what they were thinking. The handsome stranger had made his intentions clear enough on her doorstep. Emma's hand found hers, squeezing tight. They can't expect you to sacrifice yourself for the town. But even as her sister said it, Brielle could see the calculation in their neighbors' faces. One woman's happiness weighed against everyone's survival. The math was simple and brutal. Old Martha Hendricks struggled to her feet, her cane tapping against the wooden floor. My grandmother told me stories about the Ashworth women, how they're cursed to bring tragedy to any man who loves them. Maybe it's time we stop pretending it ain't true. The words hit like a slap. Brielle stood so quickly her skirts rustled in the sudden silence. You think I wanted Thomas to die? You think I chose this? Course not, dear. Martha's voice softened slightly. But facts are facts. 3 generations of Ashworth women, and every man who gets close ends up 6 feet under. Maybe this Morrison boy is different. Maybe his money can protect him where love couldn't. Pastor Williams raised his hands for quiet. We will not ask any woman to sacrifice herself. There has to be another way. But Brielle could see it in their faces. The creeping certainty that there wasn't another way. That her choice was simple. Marry Jake Morrison and save the town, or watch everyone she had ever known lose everything. After the meeting, Emma walked home in furious silence. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, and their breath made small clouds in the darkness. You're not seriously considering it, Emma said when they reached their front door. Brielle fumbled with the key, her hands shaking. What choice do I have? There's always a choice. Emma grabbed her arm, forcing her to turn around. You barely know this man. He could be cruel. He could be lying about the money. He could be just like his father. Or he could be our salvation. Emma's eyes filled with tears. What about love, Brielle? Don't you deserve to marry for love? The question pierced deeper than Martha's cruel words had. Brielle thought of Thomas, of their quiet marriage built on mutual need rather than passion, of the empty years stretching ahead of her, growing old alone while carrying the weight of everyone's survival on her shoulders. Love is a luxury we can't afford, she whispered. That night, Brielle lay awake staring at the ceiling. Through her thin walls, she could hear Emma crying softly in the next room. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie like a wounded animal. She thought about Jake Morrison's blue eyes and easy smile, about the way he had looked at her, like she was something precious instead of cursed. Could a man like that really want a woman like her? Or was he just another predator, using their desperation to get what he wanted? Near dawn, she made her decision. She would go to him. She would hear his terms and weigh them against her town's survival. But she would not go alone. Emma, she called softly through the wall. When you meet Mr. Morrison tomorrow, I want you to come with me. Silence. Then why? Brielle closed her eyes, tasting the bitterness of what she was about to do. Because if he's going to save this town by marrying an Ashworth woman, maybe it doesn't have to be me. The words hung in the darkness like a confession, like a betrayal of everything she thought she knew about herself. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Brielle Ashworth was learning just how desperate she could become. The hotel dining room smelled of coffee and fried eggs when Brielle and Emma arrived the next morning. Jake Morrison sat alone at a corner table, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains and turning his dark hair golden. He stood when he saw them, his smile warm and genuine. Mrs. Ashworth. Miss Emma. He pulled out chairs for both women, his manners polished as his boots. Thank you for coming. Emma perched on the edge of her seat like a bird ready to take flight. She wore her best dress, a soft blue that brought out her eyes and made her look younger than her 19 years. Brielle had chosen it deliberately, just as she had insisted Emma braid flowers into her dark hair. Jake's gaze lingered on Emma for a moment before returning to Brielle. I hope you've had time to consider my offer. Your offer wasn't very specific, Brielle said carefully. You mentioned saving the town, but not what you expected in return. Heat crept up Jake's neck, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. I thought my intentions were clear. I'm looking for a wife, Mrs. Ashworth. Someone to build a life with. Emma's intake of breath was sharp as a blade. Brielle felt her sister's shock like a physical blow, but forced herself to continue. Marriage is a serious commitment, Mr. Morrison. Surely you wouldn't enter into it lightly with a woman you barely know. Jake leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I've been watching this town for weeks. Watching you. The way you care for everyone else before yourself. The strength it takes to keep going when everyone whispers about curses and tragedy. That's not the kind of woman a man forgets. The words were beautiful. Too beautiful. Brielle steeled herself against their pull. My sister is also strong, she said quietly. And she's young. Unmarried. Free to love without the shadow of tragedy following her. Jake's confusion was genuine. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Emma's chair scraped against the wooden floor as she stood abruptly. Excuse me. She fled toward the hotel's front door, her skirts rustling with her hurried steps. Brielle started to follow, but Jake caught her wrist gently. Please, help me understand what just happened. His touch was warm, sending unexpected shivers up her arm. She pulled away, hating how her body responded to him. Emma is 19, beautiful, and untouched by tragedy. She would make you a perfect wife, young enough to give you many children, pure enough that no curse could touch her. Jake stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw back his head and laughed, the sound rich and warm. You think I'm here shopping for a bride like I'm buying cattle? Brielle's cheeks burned. Isn't that exactly what you're doing? No. His voice turned serious. I'm here because when I saw you kneeling by your husband's grave, something in my chest cracked open. I've been from California to New York, met debutantes and dance hall girls, and everything in between. None of them made me feel like I was drowning and breathing for the first time, all at once. The words hit her like a physical blow. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not Thomas, who had married her because she was a good cook and hard worker. Not the boys who had courted her before him, looking for a convenient wife to bear their children and keep their houses. You don't know me, she whispered. Then let me. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the heat from his skin. Let me court you properly. Let me prove that some things are stronger than curses. Through the window, Brielle could see Emma sitting on the hotel's front steps, her face buried in her hands. Guilt twisted in her stomach like a knife. She had brought her sister here like a lamb to slaughter, ready to sacrifice Emma's future for the town's salvation. The debt, she said, forcing herself to focus on what mattered. Even if you court me, even if the town still needs that money. The money isn't conditional on marriage. Jake's voice was steady. I'll pay the debt regardless. Millbrook doesn't deserve to die because my father is a greedy bastard. Brielle's world tilted. You do that? Even if I said no. Even then. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Though I'm hoping you won't. Outside, Emma had stopped crying and was watching them through the window. Her face was pale but composed, and Brielle saw something new in her sister's expression. Not hurt or betrayal, but understanding. Emma knew what Brielle had been trying to do, and why. Jake followed her gaze. Your sister is lovely. But she's not you, Brielle. She's not the woman who haunts my dreams or makes me want to be better than I am. The confession hung between them like a bridge, beautiful and terrifying. Brielle could cross it and risk everything, or turn away and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. The curse is real, she said finally. My grandmother's husband, my mother's first love, Thomas. Every man who gets close to an Ashworth woman dies. Jake's smile was soft and sad. Then I guess we'll find out if love is stronger than fear. 3 days later, Jake Morrison made good on his promise. A wagon rolled into town carrying a strongbox filled with enough gold to pay Millbrook's debt twice over. He handed the money to Sheriff Coleman in front of the entire town, asking for nothing in return except the right to court Brielle properly. The celebration that night was like nothing Millbrook had seen in years. Families who had been packing their belongings unpacked them again. Children laughed and played in the streets. Mrs. Patterson baked her famous apple pies, and even old Martha Hendricks smiled for the first time since her arthritis got bad. But Brielle felt like she was watching it all from behind glass. The relief and joy swirled around her without touching her heart. Instead, a cold dread had settled in her bones, growing stronger with each passing hour. You should be happy, Emma said as they walked home from the celebration. The town is saved. You have a handsome man courting you. What more could you want? For him to stay alive long enough to regret meeting me. Emma stopped walking. Brielle, what if the curse isn't what we think it is? What do you mean? What if it's not about the Ashworth women being cursed? What if it's about the choices we make when we're desperate? Before Brielle could ask what she meant, hoofbeats thundered down Main Street. A rider approached at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. He pulled up hard in front of the sheriff's office, dust swirling around him like a small tornado. "Sheriff Coleman," the man shouted. "Need to report an accident at the Morrison Ranch." Brielle's blood turned to ice. She ran toward the commotion, Emma close behind her. A crowd was already gathering, faces tight with concern and morbid curiosity. "What happened?" Sheriff Coleman demanded, stepping out of his office with his gun belt half buckled. "It's Jake Morrison's business partner, Frank Wheeler. Horse threw him into a ravine about 2 hours ago. Broke his neck clean through." The rider wiped sweat from his face with a shaking hand. "Strangest thing, though? That horse has been gentle as a lamb for 10 years. Never thrown nobody before today." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Eyes turned toward Brielle, and she saw the fear creeping back into their faces. The curse. It was starting again. "Where's Jake?" Brielle asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "He's the one who sent me. Found the body himself. He's pretty shook up about it." Brielle turned and ran. Behind her, she heard Emma calling her name, heard Sheriff Coleman shouting for everyone to disperse. But all she could think about was Jake, alone with his grief and the growing certainty that being near her had killed his friend. She found him at the cemetery, standing beside Frank Wheeler's freshly dug grave. His shoulders were rigid with pain, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't turn around. "Frank was a good man," he said quietly. "Been my partner for 5 years. Saved my life in a bar fight in Denver. Had a wife and 2 little girls back in Kansas City." "Jake." Her voice broke on his name. "He was happy today. Said he'd never seen me smile like I did when I gave that money away. Said love must agree with me." Jake's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Guess love killed him." Brielle wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but she was afraid. Afraid that her touch would make everything worse, would mark him for death the way it had marked all the others. "You should leave," she whispered. "Take your money and go back to wherever you came from. Find a woman who won't destroy everyone you care about." Jake finally turned to face her. His blue eyes were red-rimmed with grief and exhaustion, but they burned with determination. "Is that what you think I am? A coward who runs at the first sign of trouble? I think you're a good man who deserves better than a cursed woman. And I think you're a woman who's been carrying guilt that isn't yours to bear." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the sage and leather scent of him. "Frank's death was an accident, Brielle. A terrible, senseless accident. Not your fault. Then why do I feel like I killed him with my own hands?" Jake's face softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his palms, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. "Because you have a good heart. Because you care about people, even people you barely know. That's not a curse, sweetheart. That's a gift." The endearment sent warmth spreading through her chest. No one had called her sweetheart since her mother died. No one had looked at her the way Jake was looking at her now, like she was something precious instead of dangerous. "What if you're wrong?" she asked. "What if loving me gets you killed?" Jake's smile was soft and sad and beautiful. "Then I'll die knowing I lived more in these few days with you than I did in 30 years without you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet under the dying light of day. And for just a moment, Brielle let herself believe that love might be stronger than any curse. Word of Frank Wheeler's death spread through the county like wildfire. Within a week, whispers followed Brielle everywhere she went. Mothers pulled their children closer when she passed. Men crossed the street to avoid her shadow. Even Pastor Williams stumbled over his words when she attended Sunday service, his sermon about God's love faltering under the weight of superstition. But the cruelest blow came from an unexpected source. Emma stood at the kitchen table, flour dusting her hands and determination hardening her young face. I'm leaving, Brielle. The words hit like a physical blow. What do you mean, leaving? Billy Garrett asked me to marry him. His family is moving to Oregon Territory next month. They want to start fresh where nobody knows about curses or dead husbands. Emma's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she kneaded the bread dough. I said yes. Brielle sank into a chair, the room spinning around her. Billy Garrett was the blacksmith's son, barely 20 and sweet as summer honey. He had been courting Emma quietly for months, bringing her wildflowers and shy smiles. You love him, Brielle said. It wasn't a question. I do. Emma's voice broke slightly. But that's not why I'm leaving. Then why? Emma finally looked at her, tears streaming down her flour-dusted cheeks. Because I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to save everyone else. Because I can't stand to see Jake Morrison become another grave on that hill. Because maybe if one Ashworth woman runs away from this cursed place, the other one might find the courage to do the same. The truth of it cut deeper than any knife. Emma wasn't running to something. She was running from watching Brielle die by inches, sacrificing herself piece by piece for a town that blamed her for every tragedy. I can't leave, Brielle whispered. This is my home. These are my people. These people would burn you as a witch if they thought it would bring rain, Emma said harshly. They don't deserve your loyalty. A knock at the door interrupted them. Through the window, Brielle could see Jake's tall form on the porch, hat in hand. Her heart leaped despite everything, betraying her with its stubborn hope. Emma wiped her eyes with her apron. I'll get it. But when she opened the door, Jake's expression was grim. Behind him stood an older man with the same blue eyes and sharp features. But where Jake radiated warmth, this man seemed carved from winter itself. Brielle, Jake said quietly, I'd like you to meet my father, Thaddeus Morrison. The cattle baron stepped into their small kitchen like he owned it, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as a man who took what he wanted. His gaze swept over their modest home with barely concealed disdain before settling on Brielle with calculating coldness. So you're the widow causing all the trouble, Thaddeus said without preamble. Pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly worth the fortune my fool son spent saving this dying town. Jake's jaw tightened. Father, don't father me, boy. Frank Wheeler is dead because you're thinking with something other than your brain. How many more good men have to die before you come to your senses? The accusation hung in the air like poison. Brielle felt Emma move protectively closer, felt Jake's anger radiating from him like heat from a forge. Frank's death was an accident, Jake said through gritted teeth. Thaddeus laughed, the sound cold as mountain wind. Was it? Tell me, son, did you know about the curse before you decided to play hero? Did you know that 3 generations of Ashworth women have left dead men in their wake? That's enough. Jake stepped between his father and Brielle, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. But Thaddeus wasn't finished. I came here to make you an offer, Mrs. Ashworth. A business proposition that benefits everyone. I'm listening, Brielle said, hating how small her voice sounded. Marry me instead. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Emma gasped. Jake went rigid as a board. You're insane, Jake breathed. Thaddeus smiled, showing teeth like a wolf. Am I? I'm 62 years old. I've buried 2 wives already. If this curse of yours kills me, at least I've lived a full life. But if it doesn't, you get security, protection, and enough money to keep this town thriving for generations. Your sister gets to marry her blacksmith and live happily ever after. And my son gets to live long enough to find a woman who won't destroy him. The offer was monstrous and practical in equal measure. Brielle could see the cold logic of it, could imagine herself as the cattle baron's wife, mistress of a vast ranch, safe but unloved. It would solve everything and cost her nothing but her soul. No. Jake's voice was deadly quiet. Absolutely not. It's not your choice, son. Thaddeus never took his eyes off Brielle. It's hers. What do you say, Mrs. Ashworth? Will you save everyone you love by sacrificing yourself to an old man? Or will you keep pretending that love conquers all while good men die around you? Brielle looked at Jake's stricken face, at Emma's horrified expression, at the calculating cruelty in Thaddeus Morrison's eyes. She thought about Frank Wheeler's grave, about the whispers following her through town, about the choice between love and duty that seemed to define every Ashworth woman's life. "I need time to think," she said finally. Thaddeus tipped his hat. "You have until tomorrow at sunset. After that, the offer expires, and I take my money back. All of it." He walked out without another word, leaving his son staring at Brielle like she had just driven a knife through his heart. That night, Brielle couldn't sleep. She paced the small confines of her bedroom like a caged animal, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. Through the thin walls, she could hear Emma crying softly, and the sound cut through her heart like a blade. The choice before her was impossible. Marry Thaddeus Morrison and save everyone she loved at the cost of her own happiness, or choose Jake and watch him die like all the others, leaving the town to crumble without his father's protection. Near dawn, she gave up on sleep and dressed quietly. The air outside was crisp with the promise of winter, and frost glittered on the grass like scattered diamonds. She walked to the cemetery without conscious thought, drawn to the place where all her ghosts lay sleeping. Thomas's grave looked smaller in the pale morning light. The wooden cross she had carved leaned at an angle now, weathered by wind and rain. She knelt beside it, pressing her palm to the cold earth. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the silence. "Everyone I love is going to suffer no matter what I choose. Talking to the dead won't bring them back." Brielle spun around to find an ancient woman standing among the headstones. She was bent with age, her white hair hanging in thin braids down her back. Her dark skin was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "I'm sorry," Brielle stammered. "I didn't know anyone else was here." The old woman moved closer, her steps surprisingly steady despite her age. "I'm Iona Crowfeather. I knew your grandmother, child." Knew her story, and her grandmother's before her. Something cold slithered down Brielle's spine. "You know about the curse. I know about the choice." Iona's voice was like wind through dry leaves. "The same choice that's been haunting Ashworth women for 3 generations. The same choice that's killing them slowly, one broken heart at a time. I don't understand." Iona settled herself on a fallen log, her movements careful but graceful. "Your great-grandmother, Mercy Ashworth, was my friend. Beautiful girl, strong as mountain stone. But she fell in love with a man her family hated, a Cherokee brave named Running Wolf." Brielle's breath caught. She had never heard this story. The town threatened to drive them out if they married. Said they'd burn down every building before they'd let a white woman marry an Indian. So Mercy made a different choice. She married the banker's son instead, a cruel man who beat her and broke her spirit. Running Wolf tried to rescue her, and they killed him for it. The words painted a picture that made Brielle's stomach turn. "That's horrible, but what does it have to do with the curse?" "Everything." Iona's eyes glittered in the dawn light. Mercy was so broken by guilt and grief that she went to a medicine woman, begged for a way to make sure no Ashworth woman would ever have to choose between love and duty again. The medicine woman gave her what she asked for, but magic always comes with a price. What kind of price? The curse would protect Ashworth women from having to sacrifice love for others, but it would do so by killing any man who truly loved them. The choice would be taken away, but the cost would be everything. Brielle felt the world tilt around her. "You're saying my great-grandmother chose this? She chose to curse her own bloodline. She chose to save future generations from the pain she endured. She just didn't understand that some choices are worse than the problems they solve." The revelation hit like a physical blow. All these years, Brielle had thought the curse was something that happened to them, but it was something they had brought on themselves, a protection that had become a prison. "How do I break it?" she asked desperately. Iona smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "The same way it was made, child. With a choice. But this time, you have to choose love over fear. You have to trust that the man who loves you is strong enough to fight for that love, even against magic. And if I'm wrong, if Jake dies like all the others, then at least he'll die knowing he was loved completely, without reservation or sacrifice. That's more than most men get in this life." The old woman stood slowly, her joints creaking like old wood. The curse can only be broken by an Ashworth woman who chooses love purely, without conditions or bargains. Your grandmother tried, but she let fear make her pull back at the last moment. Your mother never got the chance. But you, child, you might be the one to finally break the chain. How do you know all this? Ayana's smile was sad and knowing. Because I was the medicine woman who cast the curse. And I've been waiting 70 years for one of Mercy's descendants to be brave enough to undo my mistake. She walked away between the headstones, her figure growing smaller and more translucent with each step until Brielle wasn't sure if she had been there at all. But her words remained, echoing in Brielle's heart like a bell. Choose love over fear. Trust that love was stronger than magic, stronger than death, stronger than the weight of 3 generations worth of tragedy. Brielle looked down at Thomas's grave one last time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I never loved you the way you deserved. But I won't make that mistake again." She turned away from the cemetery and walked back toward town, where Jake Morrison was waiting for her answer. This time, she knew what it would be. The sun was setting behind the mountains when Brielle found Jake sitting on the hotel porch, his head in his hands. He looked up as her footsteps approached, hope and fear warring in his blue eyes. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, Thaddeus Morrison emerged from the hotel lobby, his expensive coat billowing behind him like a dark cloud. "Perfect timing, Mrs. Ashworth. I trust you've made the sensible choice." Brielle looked between father and son, seeing the similarities and differences that marked them as family. Both were handsome, both were strong, but where Jake radiated warmth and kindness, his father seemed carved from ice and ambition. "I have made my choice," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "But first, I want everyone to hear the truth about the Ashworth curse." A crowd was already gathering, drawn by the drama playing out on Main Street. Sheriff Coleman stepped out of his office. Mrs. Patterson appeared in her store doorway, and families emerged from their homes to witness whatever was about to unfold. "The curse is real," Brielle continued, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "But it's not what you think it is. It's not some random evil that follows my family. It was chosen, created by my great-grandmother to protect future generations from having to sacrifice love for duty." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thaddeus's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What nonsense is this?" he demanded. "It's the truth." Brielle stepped closer to Jake, drawing strength from his presence. Mercy Ashworth was forced to choose between the man she loved and the safety of her community. She chose duty and watched the man she loved die for it. The guilt and grief drove her to seek a curse that would spare her descendants from the same choice. "And it's killed 3 generations of good men," old Martha Hendricks called out from the crowd. "Because 3 generations of Ashworth women were too afraid to choose love completely," Brielle replied. "The curse can only be broken by someone willing to love without reservation, without fear, without conditions." Jake stood slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Brielle, what are you saying?" She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm saying I love you, Jake Morrison. Not because you saved our town, not because you're handsome or charming or rich. I love you because you make me want to be brave. Because you look at me like I'm a gift instead of a burden. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Jake's face transformed, joy and wonder replacing the fear that had haunted him for days. But Thaddeus wasn't finished. Pretty words won't save him when he's 6 feet under. "You want to break your precious curse? Then prove it. Marry him right now, tonight, and let's see how long he lasts." The challenge was meant to be cruel, but Brielle felt power flowing through her like lightning. "Pastor Williams," she called out, spotting the minister in the crowd. "Will you marry us? Right here, right now?" Pastor Williams looked stunned. "Brielle, are you certain? After everything that's happened?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Jake stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "You don't have to prove anything to them. Or to me." "Yes, I do." She squeezed his fingers, feeling the warmth and strength of them. "I have to prove that love is stronger than fear. That some things are worth fighting for, even against impossible odds." Emma pushed through the crowd, her face tear-streaked but determined. "If you're doing this, I'm standing beside you." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward too, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "Count me in." One by one, others joined them. Mrs. Patterson with her kind eyes. Young Billy Garrett taking Emma's hand. Even some of the families who had whispered about curses and tragedy. Not everyone, but enough to matter. Pastor Williams opened his worn Bible, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and beautiful, conducted under the star-filled sky with the whole town watching. When Jake slipped a simple gold band onto Brielle's finger, she felt something shift deep in her bones. A loosening, like chains breaking. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams said. Jake cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle as summer rain. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Morrison?" "I'm ready for anything, as long as it's with you." He kissed her then, and the world exploded into light and sensation. The curse fought against her choice. She could feel it clawing at the edges of her consciousness like a living thing. But love was stronger. Love was pure fire burning away generations of fear and guilt. When they broke apart, Brielle saw wonder in Jake's eyes. He was alive, breathing, whole. "It's broken," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Thaddeus Morrison's face was white with rage. "This proves nothing. Give it time. He'll be dead within a week." But his words held no power now. The curse was broken, shattered by a love that chose hope over fear, trust over safety, joy over the careful preservation of a half-lived life. Jake swept Brielle into his arms, spinning her around as the crowd cheered. And for the first time in 3 generations, an Ashworth woman had chosen love completely and found it chose her back. 3 months passed like a dream made real. Jake and Brielle settled into married life with an ease that surprised everyone, including themselves. He moved into her small house, bringing laughter and warmth to rooms that had known only grief. Every morning, Brielle woke expecting to find him gone, claimed by some terrible accident. But every morning, he was there, solid and alive and utterly devoted to her. The town flourished under Jake's protection and investment. New businesses opened. Families who had planned to leave decided to stay. Children played in streets that rang with hope instead of whispers. But Thaddeus Morrison was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. The trouble started small. Mysterious fires in Jake's hay fields. Cattle found dead with no obvious cause. Workers who quit suddenly, their faces pale with fear they couldn't explain. At first, Jake tried to handle it quietly, not wanting to worry Brielle or the town. Then Emma disappeared. Brielle found the note on her kitchen table when she returned from helping Mrs. Patterson with her new baby. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant and cruel. "Your sister is safe for now. Come to Devil's Canyon at midnight if you want her to stay that way. Come alone, or she dies." TM. Terror froze her blood. Devil's Canyon was a day's ride into the Badlands, a place where decent people didn't go after dark. If Thaddeus had taken Emma there, it could only mean he planned something terrible. Jake burst through the door as she was saddling her horse, his face wild with panic. "Brielle, thank God. I heard about Emma. We have to." "No." She stepped between him and his horse, her hand on his chest. "He wants me to come alone. Like hell." Jake's voice was granite. "I'm not letting you ride into a trap. If you come with me, he'll kill her. You know he will. And if you go alone, he'll kill you both." Jake caught her face in his hands, his blue eyes fierce with love and desperation. "I won't lose you. Not now. Not ever." The words tore at her heart, but Brielle forced herself to be strong. "The curse is broken, Jake. We proved that. But it doesn't mean we're safe from human evil. Then we face it together." "No." She pulled away from him, hating how his face crumpled with hurt. "This is my choice to make. My sister to save. I won't let you die because of my family's mistakes." She mounted her horse before he could stop her, spurring the animal into a gallop before Jake could follow. Behind her, she heard him shouting her name, heard the thunder of hoofbeats as he gave chase. But she knew these trails better than he did, new shortcuts through the rocks that would give her the lead she needed. Devil's Canyon yawned before her like a wound in the earth, its red walls glowing faintly in the moonlight. Shadows moved in the depths, and Brielle's skin crawled with the certainty that she was riding into a trap. She found Thaddeus waiting beside a campfire, his silver hair gleaming like a crown. Emma sat nearby, her hands bound and her mouth gagged, but her eyes blazed with fury rather than fear. "You came," Thaddeus said conversationally, not bothering to rise. "I wasn't sure you would. Newlyweds can be so selfish." Brielle dismounted slowly, her hand moving instinctively to the gun at her hip. Jake had taught her to shoot, insisting she needed to protect herself when he wasn't around. She had never imagined using it against her father-in-law. "Let her go," she said quietly. "Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with this entire situation." Thaddeus stood, his movements predatory. "My son has lost his mind over a cursed woman. He's throwing away everything I built for him because he thinks love conquers all. Time to teach him otherwise. The curse is broken. You saw it yourself." "Did I?" Thaddeus smiled, the expression chilling. "Or did I see a clever woman manipulating my son with pretty words and tears? Either way, the result is the same. He's weak, vulnerable, a liability to everything I've worked for." Understanding hit her like a physical blow. "You killed Frank Wheeler. Frank was asking too many questions about my business dealings. He was going to cause problems." Thaddeus shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "Two birds, one stone. Get rid of a threat and convince my fool son that you were dangerous." The casual admission of murder made her stomach turn. "You're insane. I'm practical. And now I'm going to be practical about you." He gestured to two men emerging from the shadows, their faces hard and their guns drawn. "Nothing personal, Mrs. Morrison. But my son needs to learn that some dreams come with a price." Emma made muffled sounds of protest behind her gag, struggling against her bonds. Brielle calculated distances, odds, chances of survival. They weren't good. "Jake will hunt you down," she said, playing for time. "Jake will grieve and eventually move on. I'll make sure he finds a suitable wife, someone who won't fill his head with romantic nonsense." Thaddeus nodded to his men. "Make it look like bandits. Kill the sister too. Can't have witnesses." The men raised their guns, and Brielle knew she was out of time. She drew her own weapon, knowing she could maybe get one of them before they cut her down. Then the night exploded with gunfire and war cries that made her blood sing with recognition. Jake burst into the canyon on horseback, flanked by Sheriff Coleman and half the men from town. They came like avenging angels, guns blazing and hearts full of righteous fury. The battle was brief and vicious. Thaddeus's hired killers were good, but they were outnumbered and outraged. When the smoke cleared, both gunmen were dead and Thaddeus Morrison knelt in the dirt with blood running from a graze on his temple. Jake was off his horse and crushing Brielle against his chest before she could blink. "Don't you ever," he said fiercely, "ever try to protect me by risking yourself again. We're partners now. That means we face everything together." Brielle melted into his embrace, feeling the last of her walls crumble completely. "How did you find me?" Emma left a trail only an idiot could miss. He helped untie her sister, who immediately launched herself into Billy Garrett's waiting arms. "Plus, I had help." He gestured to the canyon rim, where an ancient figure sat on horseback, silhouetted against the stars. Iona Crow Feather raised one weathered hand in farewell before disappearing into the night. Sheriff Coleman hauled Thaddeus to his feet, iron shackles gleaming in the firelight. "Thaddeus Morrison, you're under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and attempted murder." As they led him away, the old man's eyes found Brielle one last time. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll destroy him eventually. It's what your kind does." Jake stepped protectively in front of her. "No, old man. What we do is love each other enough to be stronger than people like you." And watching her husband's face in the flickering light, seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes, Brielle finally understood what Iona had tried to tell her. The curse hadn't been broken by her choice alone. It had been broken by their choice, together, to trust in something bigger than fear. 5 years later, Brielle Morrison stood on the porch of her new home, watching the sun rise over the Morrison Ranch. The house Jake had built for her was everything she had never dared to dream of. Wide verandas wrapped around white-painted walls. Gardens bloomed with roses and wildflowers. Children's laughter echoed from the yard where her 3-year-old son chased chickens while her baby daughter slept peacefully in her arms. The curse was truly broken, not just for her, but for all the Ashworth women who would come after. Her children would grow up knowing love as a blessing, not a burden. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake said, stepping out onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee. At 35, he was more handsome than ever, his face lined with laugh lines and his eyes bright with contentment. "Just counting my blessings," Brielle said, accepting the coffee gratefully. All of them. Through the morning mist, she could see Millbrook thriving in the valley below. The town had tripled in size since Thaddeus Morrison's arrest and conviction. Jake had used his inheritance to turn the area into a prosperous cattle and farming community where families could build futures without fear. Emma appeared around the side of the house, her own baby strapped to her chest while she chased after Brielle's son. Marriage to Billy Garrett had transformed her from a worried girl into a confident woman whose forge produced the finest metalwork in 3 counties. "Thomas is trying to ride the rooster again," Emma called out, laughing as she scooped up the giggling boy. "I swear he gets more like his father every day." Brielle smiled, watching her son's determined attempts to mount anything that moved. Jake's fearlessness lived in their children, but tempered with the wisdom she hoped she had given them. "Mrs. Morrison?" A young woman approached on horseback, her travel-stained clothes marking her as someone who had ridden far. "I'm looking for Brielle Morrison. They told me in town she might be able to help me." Something in the woman's voice made Brielle's heart quicken. She handed the baby to Jake and stepped forward. "I'm Brielle Morrison. My name is Sarah Blackwood. I'm from a town called Cedar Falls, 3 days' ride north." The woman's eyes were desperate, haunted. "We've heard stories about you, about how you broke a family curse. I was hoping, that is, I need." "Your curse too," Brielle said gently. Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. 5 generations of Blackwood women. Every man who loves us dies within a year of marriage. I'm engaged to a wonderful man, but I'm terrified to marry him. The whole town says I should call off the wedding, but I love him so much." Brielle felt Jake's hand slip into hers, offering silent support. She thought of all the years of loneliness and fear that had defined her life before him. Thought of the women who might still be trapped in curses of their own making. "Curses can be broken," she said firmly. "But it takes courage. It takes choosing love over fear, even when everyone tells you you're being foolish." "Will you help me?" Sarah asked desperately. "Will you come to Cedar Falls and teach me how to break it?" Brielle looked at Jake, seeing understanding and encouragement in his blue eyes. He had always known this day would come, known that her story was bigger than just their happiness. "We'll both come," Jake said. "If you're going to fight a curse, you need backup." 2 weeks later, they rode into Cedar Falls with their children and a wagon full of supplies. The town was smaller than Millbrook, more isolated, but the fear in the people's faces was achingly familiar. Sarah Blackwood waited for them at the church, her young man beside her and hope shining in her eyes for the first time in months. The curse was different but the same. Born from desperation and good intentions, fed by fear and sustained by the belief that love was something to be sacrificed rather than celebrated. It took 3 days of careful ritual and absolute faith, but when Sarah and her beloved spoke their vows under the open sky, Brielle felt another chain break somewhere in the fabric of the world. As they prepared to leave Cedar Falls, an old woman approached their wagon. "You'll be back," she said cryptically. "There are more towns, more curses, more women who need to remember that love is stronger than fear." She was right. Over the years that followed, Jake and Brielle traveled across the territories, finding communities trapped by supernatural problems that had very human solutions. Their children grew up on the road sometimes, learning that family wasn't just about blood, but about the people you chose to protect and serve. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the cemetery where it all began. Thomas's grave was overgrown now, peaceful in the shade of a young oak tree. Brielle knelt beside it, no longer feeling guilt or regret, but gratitude for the path that had led her to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered to the silent earth, "for teaching me what I didn't want, so I could recognize what I did." Jake's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady as always. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word still filled her with wonder. Not just the house or the ranch, or even the town, but the life they had built together. The love that had conquered not just curses but cynicism, fear, and the small-minded cruelty of people who preferred others to be as miserable as themselves. "Always," she said, rising to take his hand. "As long as you're with me, I'm already there." They walked back toward their children's laughter and their future's promise, leaving the ghosts of the past to rest in peace at last. And somewhere in the wind that moved through the grass, Brielle could swear she heard Iona Crow Feather's approving voice. "Well done, daughter. Well done." If you've been moved by Brielle and Jake's incredible love story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that will restore your faith in true love. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories are the ones that remind us that no matter how dark the world gets, love really can conquer all. See you in the next story, where we'll discover another amazing journey of courage, hope, and the magic that happens when two hearts refuse to give up on each other.